Hi, Steve Stine from Guitar Zoom here, and I want to show you something super cool that you can do with regular open chords that you're learning how to play or you learned how to play, but making them a little more interesting for two reasons. Number one, you can create really fun and interesting melodies with your chords, and number two, you can change up the sounds of the chords themselves to be more interesting to both the listener and to you. So what we're going to be doing is looking at what we call sus chords. There are two different kinds of sus chords. There's what's often referred to as a sus2 and a sus4. Now, we're not going to get all big into theory here, and you don't need to worry about the tablature. You just click on the link and you can download the tablature and it'll save you a headache. So basically what's happening is the word sus, think of as being suspending or taking away temporarily. Okay, so what happens in a chord is made up of a number of notes, namely 3 different notes. And that middle note is what we refer to as a third. Now, don't worry about why and all that sort of thing, but the chord is made up of the first, the third, and the fifth notes of a key. Now, that third, what happens is that third's the one that makes the chord sound minor or major. You'll notice that always, the minor and major sounds are always one fret away from each other, right? A minor and A major, or D minor, like this, or D major, or E minor, E major. They're always one fret apart. And again, don't worry about the theory behind it. Just think about what we're doing here. So what happens is that middle note that makes the chord sound major or minor, what we're going to do is we're going to take that out or suspend that note by adding in the second note of the scale or the fourth note of the scale, sus2 or sus4. So basically, if you think about it, if I take this A minor chord and I take this first finger off the guitar, I'm taking that minor sound out. I'm suspending it. And then I can add it back in. I can take my pinky and place it on the second string on the third fret, and I'm creating what's called a sus4 chord. 4 is always higher, and 2 is always lower. So a sus4 wants to go back. So an easy way to remember this is if you can define, even by looking at it, even if you don't know your theory, what note is making the chord sound minor or major, what note that is, that's the note that we're going to surround with a sus2 or a sus4. So for instance, if I take a D chord here, this note here, my middle finger, is the note that makes it sound major or minor. So the sus2 and the sus4 exist around that. So my sus4 is right here. Then sus2. And you'll notice as I'm playing that D chord, what I can do is instead of having to move chords from D to G to A to E minor and blah, 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 which I can still do, I can stay on that chord and create a melody by using the regular sound, the fourth, the sus4, and the sus2. Okay? And you've probably heard this before in things like that sort of thing. So sus chords like to go back to the original chord. Okay, or A minor. Now, the susses that I'm adding on both sides of this chord, they don't change whether the chord is major or minor, and that's the next thing I want to show you. If I make A minor, I'm adding in 0, and I'm adding in 3 on the second string. If I was making an A major chord instead, I'm still going to add in 0 or 3. So the sus2 and the sus4 are not affected by whether the note in the middle there is major or minor. If I make A minor, it's still 0 and 3. If it's major, it's still 0 and 3. Which is pretty cool. That way, you don't have to get confused on whether the chord is minor or major, where the sus2 and the sus4 is going to go. How I did it when I first started learning this, it was far easier for me to visualize a major chord, like D major, and the sus4 was always a half step higher, and then the sus2 was always a whole step lower from a major chord. If you do a minor chord, it's going to be just the opposite. Okay, so if I make D minor, now the sus4 is a whole step higher, and the sus2 is a half step lower. So in my mind, it was just easier for me when I first started learning how to do sus chords, was to always visualize a major chord, and then think, okay, well the sus4 is a half step higher, and the sus2 is a whole step lower. And then it was easier for me to figure out. So C, do this with me once. Make a C chord. Now, this middle finger here is the note that makes it sound major or minor. So do this for me. Where would the sus4 be with that logic? And your answer should be your pinky would go a half step higher. And if you wanted a sus2, you would go a whole step lower, which means your finger would come off, which it often does. So, point is step one is you can use the sus2 and the sus4 to create some melodic movement around the chord without having to move chords all the time. But the second thing you can do with sus chords is instead of always thinking that they have to resolve back to the main chord, they don't. Like I might just play sus2 and that's it. Then A sus2. D sus2. And you just leave that open and airy sound because you like it. So here's what I want you to think about. Using some of these sus ideas in your music, in your writing, in your practicing, your jamming, whatever it might be. And the other thing to remember too is that when you're learning other people's songs, whether you play, with a band or you play in church or you play at school or whatever it might be, and you come across chords, like if the song says it wants a D chord, that doesn't mean that you can't explore a D sus2 sound or a D sus4 sound, be it in a melody or be it as a actual chord replacement. I do it all the time. So if the song asks for a D chord, and let's say there's two guitar players in the band, whatever band I'm playing in, and one's already playing a D chord, I might try something else just to make things a little more interesting. I don't always have to do that, and it's not always going to work, but it's certainly an option for me to keep things fun and interesting for me as a guitar player, and I hope fun and interesting for whatever listener there might be in my situation. So these are really fun, and I think you're going to find that they again will take a little bit of information and turn it into a long journey, because you can just make up a lot of really neat things, like what I was just doing there, like D. No, I haven't even left the chord yet, and I've got this little melody happening. So who knows what will happen when I go to a C chord or a G chord or an E minor chord. I can keep going with these ideas. So take care, practice hard, stay positive, and I will speak to you soon.